When we finished editing our interview with Chipotle's Chris Arnold, we realized there was some interesting stuff left on the proverbial cutting room floor. So here we present a bonus episode. We talk with Chris about the company's store design, their marketing, the terrific animation video Back to the Start featuring Willie Nelson, and other issues around food supply, and farmers seeking to work outside the industrial agricultural economy.
This is Cornucopia.
Store designs, I find them extremely compelling, very interesting use of corrugated metals, as well as those ads where there's just that large burrito to that animated video you did with the Willie Nelson soundtrack. There's a really, really great marketing team. Is that done in-house? Is that done through agencies?
So the store design is done almost all in-house, and the use of materials that you noted, the corrugated barn metal and plywood and things like that, go back to the very first restaurant here in Denver. And in putting that restaurant together, Steve didn't have a whole lot of money to open the first Chipotle. He opened that with a loan of about $85,000 from his dad. And the materials that we used, he liked. I mean, it kind of gave it this kind of modern industrial aesthetic. They were also cheap and lasted really well. And kind of in retrospect, I think there was a sort of stronger parallel between the materials and the design of the restaurant and the menu and the food than we realized in the very beginning. And that parallel was this. Chipotle's food is made with really common ingredients, chicken and peppers and cilantro and lime juice and herbs and spices and things, but used in ways that were pretty unusual. And we've always believed that sort of elevated our food into something that was, more special and more unique. Our rice, for example, instead of being a kind of traditional tomato-based Mexican rice, our rice is steamed jasmine rice, tossed with a little salt and fresh chopped cilantro and lime juice. And so all very common ingredients, but used in uncommon ways to create something more extraordinary. And sort of through our early evolution, we really started to believe that you had a similar kind of parallel with the design and construction of the restaurants, where they were made of these really sort of common building materials, but used in uncommon ways, which created an aesthetic that was more unique and extraordinary. When you look at the marketing pieces that you mentioned, that's sort of a combination of in-house and agency partners. The little animated film with the Willie Nelson song, we called it Back to the Start, and the story arc there was very similar to some of our suppliers. The story arc was a family farmer who industrialized his farm and then had the epiphany that this isn't what he wanted to do, and went back to the start and returned to farming the way that the family had done before. So that film was actually made, it was conceived internally and was made by a filmmaker from London, a guy named Johnny Kelly, and the stop-motion animation that was done by a guy who had worked on the Wallace and Gromit movies.
Oh, nice. I'm a huge Wallace and Gromit fan.
They're amazing. The marketing things and the voice tends to have originated from Chipotle, and we've had some really talented third-party partners and agencies along the way that have helped us do some of those things and helped us evolve the voice a little bit over the years.
Having spent about 32 years now in the natural and organic products industry, I tend to be a little more skeptical. But and seeing that video, then shortly after you guys did the non-GMO pledge, And for people that don't understand in terms of food supply in any sort of manufacturing or restaurant operation, a lot of bakers will make organic bread. Often they will not put an organic seal on it for two reasons. Sometimes the certification cost is high. The other reason is also that if they do their labels as organic and there are any supply interruptions, they're not going to be able to sell their products unless they have availability of ingredients. So I have to say, despite my more skeptical brain, I continue to be impressed. And I look forward to getting any feedback from folks that might have a different take. My former colleague and friend Warren Jones is going to listen to this episode and say, Matt, if you really care about the animals, you shouldn't eat them. Disregarding that cognitive dissonance, I do think the substantive differences are really noteworthy.
And if you have time for one more story, I have a great
Absolutely.
one to close out on. And this was one of the inspirations for the Back to the Start film, actually, and kind of what prompted this is what you were saying just there. I think when you're somebody who really understands these issues and the importance of these issues in food more societally, then the things that we've done as a business resonate with you more. And one of my favorite Chipotle suppliers and supplier stories, and this gentleman was one of the people who was sort of the motivation for the story arc of the little animated film. It's a gentleman named Russ Kramer, and he operates a pork co-op called Ozark Mountain. Russ lives in a place called Frankenstein, Missouri, in the shadow of the Ozarks.
Nice.
And Russ grew up in a farming family, and says, as a kid he liked pigs more than people, and he grew up working on the farm and went off to college, to ag school. When he finished college, he came back to the family farm and convinced them that the only way to make money in hogs was to industrialize, raising pigs in these big confined, buildings and all of that. So they did that. And one day, while out tending to the pigs, Russ got gored by one of his boars, and in kind of typical tough farm boy fashion, he kind of pulled his boot up a little higher and went on about his day. And that injury nearly killed him because it was resistant because of all the antibiotics that they were feeding the pigs. He went 3 or 4 courses of antibiotics.
Wow.
Before they were able to arrest the infection. And there's a great NBC, one of the NBC News magazine shows from several years ago now with Russ telling this story, and he tells it better than I, although I've heard him tell it enough that I know the basics of it. And that's when he decided that we're not going to do this anymore. I don't want this to be sort of our legacy and the way we're raising these animals. So they went back to doing it the way they did before, and he really learned a lot about sort of the natural barriers in that landscape to the spread of disease and things, and he has worked tirelessly to put together this little Ozark Mountain pork co-op, and it's guys like Russ and those stories that were the motivation for that little film, and there are so many of them in our system and elsewhere. I spoke with a guy who you may also know of, Will Harris, who raises organic beef cattle in Georgia, and Will and I spoke at a conference together at the Monterey Bay Aquarium in out in your neck of the woods, and to that film, and he said, that film that Chris just showed from Chipotle, that's my story. Will is another 4th or 5th generation cattle rancher, and when he got to the point of thinking about what his legacy would be, what he was going to leave to the next generation of the family, he didn't want it to be that commodity cattle ranching model, and so he started over again. And those guys are really, I think, amazing stories and amazing inspirations.
Yeah, absolutely. And if listeners aren't aware, so many of the farmers, whether they're dairy farmers, pork, poultry ranchers that operate under contract for big suppliers, they get screwed royally. They make no money. It's the untold story of America's industrial agriculture.
It's really unfortunate, and I don't remember which of our suppliers made this observation once, but it was one of the folks from Nyman Ranch, and the observation was this: when you're participating in a commodity system, whether you're producing dairy as you're just referencing, or chicken or pork or whatever it is, the commodity markets say this is how much we will pay you for your chicken, pigs, milk, cattle, corn, whatever it is you're producing. When you step out of that system and into a system like Nyman Ranch, that transaction changes, and instead of being this is what we'll pay you, the transaction now becomes how much do you want for your pigs? And that's a really important shift, and it's one that gives the farmer a better opportunity to earn a good living and to raise animals in a way that makes a whole lot more sense. And so it's really just there's more winning for everyone involved in the system in that kind of a model.
All right, that's the bonus episode. If you want to learn more, check out the film Under Contract. It's a brilliant exploration of the relationship between large industrial food processors and their contract farmers. In addition, if you're concerned about antibiotic in meat, look at Consumers Union Antibiotic Scorecard. Thanks again to Chris Arnold. Subscribe, share, sign up for our email, buy a tote bag, Cornucopia, the cult culture and business of food. Thanks for listening.
This is Cornucopia.